right, good morning, everybody. So you may or may not remember a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago now, I made a comment about empathy that is also available on my YouTube and my Dharma podcast called Dark Dharma, in which I've gotten lots of feedback on this comment. Makes me want to make more controversial comments. Not that I think it was controversial. I think the reason why people didn't like the comment is because I was quoted a comment made by Elon Musk. I think people were more upset that I mentioned his name than the comment itself, which is a whole nother topic. So I want to talk about empathy, compassion, and how complicated these ideas are, and how culturally right now we're really getting hammered by the misunderstanding of these words in a way that we can hopefully find a way that's helpful. So I'll speak first from Paul Ekman and Dan Goleman's work around the emotional side of these things, which is quite complicated, and then tying that into the way the Buddha talks about these in the early discourses with terms like suffering, compassion, dukkha, these kinds of ideas. And I think they're actually pretty well correlated to each other, although the let me take care of that. Although the emotional intelligence stuff is probably a little bit more complicated. So let's get into it. So the work of Goleman, who talks about emotional intelligence for many years, and him and Paul Ekman have actually worked together. I know both of them very well. So everything I'm going to say is not my opinion. This is just the facts, ma'am. So please take it with a grain of salt or a pinch of salt. I'm just reporting on what has been said before. And I've also find, in my experience, it to be very true. Also, somebody who has undergone what's called empathy fatigue or affective empathy fatigue syndrome twice. So I have interesting firsthand experiences with both of these. So they talk about three kinds of empathy. There's three kinds of empathy, which is first to just say that empathy is very complicated. It's not just either caring or don't caring. It's a very complicated system that includes the emotion and the mind. Also, empathy can be constructive. It can be helpful. It can be constructive empathy. Empathy can also be very destructive. It can burn people out. It can take people down. It can destroy relationships. Empathy, just to be clear, in and of itself is not just a good thing. Okay. A lot of times people confuse empathy with compassion. They're not the same. And empathy is not necessarily a good thing. The work of Paul Bloom in his book Against Empathy teases it out in great detail. The three kinds of empathy, I'll kind of say them and I'll walk through them slowly, is cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and compassion. Cognitive empathy is very, very important because cognitive empathy, what it does, it allows me to see the perspective from the other person. And Dan Siegel's work on mindsight, he has a whole chapter on perspective taking in his work around mindsight, which is kind of his analysis of mindfulness. But it's being able to be talking with another person and see where they're coming from without getting upset or defensive or blaming. Apparently, nobody knows how to do this if you've been paying attention. It's being able to see things from the other person's point of view, from their perspective, and actually being interested in understanding where they might be coming from or how they got to where they came to. How did they arrive at the way that they see things? So it's not overwhelming. We usually don't get too upset. Cognitive empathy is just a way of trying to understand where the other person is coming from. It also, some people use this word, a theory of mind. And a theory of mind is if I can understand where you're coming from, if I can understand what you're thinking or how you're putting your ideas together, there's a good chance I'm going to be able to understand how you're feeling about that also. But on a cognitive level, it's very important to be able to do this. As I said, apparently most people seemingly are not able to do this. Emotional empathy, and there's not a hierarchy here. There's no listing them in any particular order. Emotional empathy, or sometimes called affective empathy, is feeling what the other person feels, which may be very, very helpful, or it may not be very helpful at all. Example, if I'm an ER nurse working in maybe a dangerous city, and I have to go into the room and meet the parents whose son just got killed or somebody in their family just died, and if I have too much emotional empathy, I'm going to walk into that room, I'm going to feel what they're feeling, and I'm going to start crying, and I'm going to fall apart, and I'm going to be a big mess, which is not helpful or appropriate or professional. So if I'm feeling too much what the other person's feeling, that can be very, very unhelpful. I actually have had to work on this. I have a little bit too much emotional empathy historically. I have what's also called emotional resonance, which we hear that and we think, well, yeah, that's a good thing. I want to be able to resonate emotionally with the other person. I want to be able to feel what other people are feeling. Not necessarily. You know what I mean? You do not always want to be taking on the emotional experience of other people because you will get fried. This is what leads to empathy fatigue. People who work in, and this has been, first responders, therapists, people who work in the addiction world, all the helping industries, all these people are totally vulnerable to this because they get burned out. They're just around so much human suffering all day long. They take on too much of the feelings and the emotion of other people and they totally collapse. Super destructive. It happened to me twice when I lived in Nashville. And so so that's not good, So we want to be able to just kind of sense, and you're probably doing it right now. We want to just start to diagnose ourselves and understand how much empathy fatigue do we have? How much do we get involved in the other person's feelings without actually meaning to, right? And this is a big problem right now. This is a very the destructive side of this right now is if you watch fucking Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow or whatever side of the political spectrum you're watching, both of them are trying to do the same thing. They're both of them are trying to get you angry or overwhelmed about the information that they are presenting. That is what the media does. The media is trying to, they have meetings about this. This is fucking well intentional. Their goal is to get you to feel what they want you to feel. So you'll keep watching, so you'll subscribe to a different line of thinking. I mean, this is basically the media, right? Happens to me. Have you ever been watching something on YouTube and all of a sudden all really upset? You're scared, you're angry, you're outraged, you can't believe it. Well, that's exactly what they want you to do. They want you to get overwhelmed. They're trying to get into your emotional empathy system. And some of us are wired in different ways. So you have to be mindful. You have to be careful. You have to monitor how much of this you take in. And you have to be aware of how vulnerable you might be to having your emotional system hacked by bad actors. Right. And so we could talk about this all day, but that's what emotional empathy is. Now also, if somebody that I care about, if I'm talking to one of you one-on-one and somebody dies in your life or you're having some really difficult experiences, in that moment it might be actually appropriate for me to feel what you're feeling. It might maybe help us have some emotional resonance. Maybe there's a deeper connection, maybe there's a way of talking. So again, it's not good or bad, it just depends. So emotional empathy is very ambiguous, right? Some people have too much. Some people don't have enough. Uh, it's very much an individual case by case basis. The criteria is the key criteria in emotional intelligence is being able to choose whether or not I resonate with you or not, which I've gotten quite good at. Where in that moment, I can choose, do I want to feel what this person's feeling? Do I want to resonate with this or do I not want to resonate with this? And a lot of times I'm like, I don't want no part of this. I'm not going to resonate with what's being offered here. Or, I really care about this person. I have a deep, long-standing connection with this person. I have a relationship with this person. I'm going to resonate right now. So there has to be choice. And, as they say in cultivating emotional balance, awareness plus choice equals freedom. And if you don't choose whether you become emotionally empathy in a given situation, you are not free. You will be hijacked by other people's feelings and emotions all day long, and it is totally exhausting to the point where you just start avoiding people, which also is not necessarily so good. So you see what I mean? This is really messy. The third kind of empathy is, of course, compassion or empathic concern, which is kind of what we're looking for, right? It's being able to cognitively, there's cognitive empathy. I understand where you're coming from for the most part. I see where you're coming from. I can resonate with what you're coming, where you're coming from. So I can understand, I can feel into the shared space, and I can choose to respond or not. Then there's a desire of like, gee, I wonder, can I help? Can I be of service? Can I help alleviate the suffering of the other person? And unfortunately, a lot of the times you cannot. Sometimes it's just, as they say, holding space, just hearing, just hearing with some empathic concern of like, oh yeah, that's really hard. I get it. Oh, that sucks. I totally feel you. That's like such a drag, you know. It's just like that being there for that person, which is kind of that empathy, the kind of compassion, empathy, empathic concern they call it, which requires the other three. So that I think that's where we want to end up. Is we want to be able to understand where the person's coming from. We want to be able to choose how much resonance we have. We want to have that choice. And then we want to see if there's anything we can do to alleviate that, which in many times there's a lot of powerlessness. There's actually not much that can be done. Right. So that those are the three kinds of empathy, the way that Goleman has written about them for the last 30, 40 years now. And now if we look at the Dharma, if we look at Buddhism, if we look in the Pali text, for example, there's actually two words in the Pali text that mean or translate as compassion. One of the words is anukampa, and the other word is karuna. Most people know karuna as one of the Brahma Viharas, which is sort of the mental, emotional cultivation of this quality, of this third kind of empathy. This actually you train your mind, you cultivate caring, compassion, karuna. Anukampa is very different. Anukampa also appears in the Pali texts many, 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 many times. The word karuna does not appear in the Pali text very much at all. And when the word karuna appears in the Pali text, it's always situated within the four Brahma Viharas. You don't, and I could be wrong. I haven't, scoured this text to the end of the universe. I've come close. Um, you don't see it stand alone. You don't see it just used as a one-off. When the word karuna is used in the Pali discourses, it's used in its setting of the four Brahma Viharas: kindness, compassion, gratitude, equanimity. So it's always part of that system where Anukampa is all over the place. Anukampa is this sometimes, and this is where Buddhist teachers get it wrong, and it bothers me, is a lot of times people say, well, compassion is the trembling of the heart in response to someone else's pain. That's not Anukampa, but that's not Karuna. We're not trying to cultivate that. That's actually this empathy I'm talking about. It's crying out at the crying out of another. It's seeing the suffering of another person and being involved in a way. It's not necessarily good or helpful. It's just that it's that recognition. It's kind of the doorway in. It's the recognition of a shared humanity. I see that you're hurting, and seeing you hurting, I'm hurting a little bit right now. There's that kind of shared dynamic, which is actually a beautiful thing, but that's not where we want to end. And this is kind of my general assessment of why compassion is so misunderstood and so poorly taught in the Buddhist space and in the secular mindfulness space. Is I think generally people think that compassion is you're feeling bad and therefore I need to feel bad. And if you're feeling bad and I'm feeling bad with you, I'm having compassion, which is not true. It might be the beginning of that. It might lead to that, but feeling bad about the suffering of the world helps zero people, you know. And I'll say one other thing too that's been this is probably the most controversial, but it's been pretty well looked at in modern academia is a lot of this kind of feeling bad about things as compassion is kind of a virtue signaling thing. It's kind of a product of the late stages of the kind of whiteness or racial work, which I think is all great, by the way, but it's a product of the woke kind of thinking around like if there's something going on in the world socially, politically that's sort of wrong and you're not fucking totally outraged or overwhelmed by it, you're somehow complicit. Like, I see this happen to me. I got in like a fight with my mom a month ago about this. Like that Donald Trump was doing a bunch of stuff and I wasn't totally pissed off and upset. And she thought I was like on the other side. It's like this is really a big, big problem right now is that like if I'm not overwhelmed or angry about injustices in the world, then the assumption is I just don't care, which is totally not true. Me being overwhelmed and angry and outraged and upset about all of the tragedy in the world, which has been going on as far as humans have been alive, frankly, doesn't help anybody. It's fucking useless. You know, it's hard to not do. It happens to me all the time, but I really have to like question myself in that space of like, what's really going on here? You know? And so when you look at it kind of clinically, in a very simple way, compassion and mindfulness is being able to be in tune with any sort of pain without becoming overwhelmed by it or without disconnecting from it. It's really that simple. If you're getting overwhelmed, that's not what we're trying to cultivate. You can just know that anytime you're overwhelmed, you're getting too much emotional empathy, you're getting a lot of charge, maybe you're getting angry, you're getting contemptuous, you're going into territory that's going to be unhelpful, right? Or to just disconnect, or to just be like, I can't even. Now, probably for most people, it's better to disconnect than to be overwhelmed. But when we disconnect or we have cognitive empathy or we're not overwhelmed, there can be this assumption in society that we just don't give a shit, right? And that part of the hallmark of caring or true compassion is being outraged or overwhelmed or hysterical, which is simply not true and is a huge problem. I'm sure you've seen it, right? So we have to kind of position ourselves here. Anukampa, when the Buddha speaks of Anukampa, is interestingly, you've probably heard me talk about this sutta. I was really onto it a couple of years ago called The Noble Quest, where the Buddha basically wakes up and he's walking around and he's trying to figure out what am I going to do now? And he's considering in his own mind, he's actually having a conversation with himself in his own head about what's he going to do with this Dharma that I've reached. And one of his thoughts is, well, I should teach you this Dharma. And then he says, well, maybe not. He says, if I were to teach the Dharma, it would be tiring, it would be vexing for me. And he kind of surveys the world that he sees how, horrible people are. And he's like, you know what? This isn't gonna go down. I mean, for me to try to explain this to people is just gonna be a total hassle for me. And people just aren't gonna want to hear it. And and then it said in the discourses that out of anukampa, out of a deep concern and a deep care for the suffering of human beings in the world, he decided to teach the Dharma because, as this is where the phrase comes from, those who have little dust in their eyes. He says there's those people, there are some people, of course, all you good people on the other side of the screen here, who have little dust in their eyes, just a little dust. Now, if you've ever had dust in your eyes, a little bit of dust is a lot. Like one piece of dust is a lot. So if you have a little dust in your eyes, then you might understand this. You might be interested in this. You might be willing to kind of cultivate the courage, the willingness that it takes to live in this world from a Dharma mind, a Dharma heart. And that's why he did what he did. And if he didn't do that, we wouldn't even be here right now. So so all this is to say, this is very, very complicated, and everybody is very uniquely different in their makeup. Um, and so as we enter into society in the current world we live in, the skill that we probably want to develop first, that's going to keep us from becoming overwhelmed or becoming righteous or becoming full of contempt, intellectual superiority about I'm so smart and these other people are so stupid. Like that's fucking ridiculous. It's to develop some cognitive empathy of really, my wife is actually amazing at this. She can have very, very charged conversations with other people because she's so interested in how they came out, how they came to their conclusions. I watch her do it. I can't even imagine, you know? It's like really hot topic issues. She can do it. It's crazy. Um, is being interested to understand where and how the other person came to their views. Cognitive empathy. What is their perspective like? What is the perspective taking without adopting or falling into the emotional experience about how you feel about their opinion. Now, I also want to say this is pretty advanced. This is very advanced to be able to do this. But you want to be able to do this because you can learn a lot about other people that way. It's also really good because it's great emotional intelligence training. To having a conversation with somebody who holds a very, very different view on something that you do that's maybe charged and being able to hear them out without getting that emotional uprising, like that is really good emotional intelligence training. I mean, that's emotional skills training 101. I mean, it's trigger practice, you know? Next time you're bored and you got nothing to do, go down to your local Trump rally and see if you can go without getting upset or triggered, right? Like, good luck with that. So, you gotta ease into this shit. I practice this stuff all the time because of where we live. We live in what I call this hippie redneck town where we have both. We have extremes like on both sides of the thing. So I try to be unpigeonholable because nobody knows where I'm coming from, which is a whole skill in of itself. So, kind of hard to do a practice on this, but I will attempt to do a practice that is the cultivation of karuna.